All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're digging into a situation that is quite literally unfolding as we speak. We're talking about an event that's about to shake the global energy market to its absolute core and redraw geopolitical lines in real time. It all comes down to a single maritime choke point, just one narrow strip of water that essentially holds the keys to millions of barrels of oil and the entire stability of our global supply chain. It's a truly fascinating look at how a localized conflict can instantly, and I mean instantly, become a global crisis.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll take a look at the gate of grief. Then we'll dive into the massive undertaking of rerouting global oil, unpack the new energy crisis, explore the big question of why they're closing it now, and finish up by looking at shifting global battlegrounds. Okay, part one, the gate of grief.
To really grasp the breaking events sparking this whole crisis, we kind of have to start with the geography. And specifically, we need to talk about the name itself, the Bab al-Mandab. It sits right there between Djibouti and Yemen, acting as the vital connector between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Now get this, its name literally translates to the Gate of Grief. And honestly, given what's happening there right now, that ominous name is incredibly fitting. We're looking at one of the most absolutely crucial geographic positions on the planet for global trade. And well, here's exactly why the Gate of Grief is living up to its name. There have been threats floating around for weeks, but on a recent Monday evening, it actually happened. The Houthis, who control most of western Yemen and are widely considered to be an Iranian proxy, announced a total, complete blockade on everything coming in and out of Saudi Arabia's ports. Now, sure, while this blockade technically says it's only targeting Saudi ships, the reality of maritime trade is that a disruption on this scale is absolutely going to spook non-Saudi ships as well. Basically, this vital choke point, it's just been completely shut off to the world.
Moving on to part two, rerouting global oil. To understand just how serious this blockade is, we have to look back at how countries desperately scrambled to adapt after the recent closure of the Strait of Hormuz. When Hormuz closed, 20 million barrels of oil, that's roughly 20% of the entire global market, were blocked. Boom, gone. The affected countries had to pull off some incredible logistical gymnastics. I mean, the UAE managed to reroute 1.5 million barrels a day to the Fujairah port using the 80 COP pipeline. Iraq sent 300,000 barrels a day all the way through a pipeline to Turkey. In Saudi Arabia, they managed to reroute a staggering 4 million barrels a day to the Yanbu port on the Red Sea via their east-west pipeline. This was clever, fast-acting, and it initially brought some good news, knocking that global supply shortfall from 20 million down to about 15 million barrels a day.
But here's the crazy part. That massive logistical success inadvertently created an intense new dependency on the Bab al-Mandab. Before the war, this strait handled maybe 2 million barrels a day, mostly Russian oil. But by June, because of all that rerouting we just talked about, especially by Saudi Arabia, that number literally tripled to 6 million barrels a day. The world essentially put a massive chunk of its energy eggs into one single, highly vulnerable basket.
Which brings us to section three, the new energy crisis.
So let's look at the immediate real-world consequences of this new blockade on our logistics and our energy markets. 18 million. I want you to just picture that number for a second. If Saudi exports through the Bab al-Mandab drop all the way to zero, which, by the way, is exactly what the Houthis are aiming for, the global daily oil shortfall jumps from 15 million barrels straight up to 18 million barrels. And remember, that number could actually climb even higher if non-Saudi shipping companies get too nervous to make the trip. We are staring down the barrel of a severe, compounding energy shock. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, why not just take another route, go a different way? Well, let me break down the total logistical nightmare of finding an alternative here. Step one, you can't just easily send these ships north because fully loaded supertankers are physically just too massive to fit through the Suez Canal. So step two, if you want to get that oil to buyers in Asia, these colossal ships have to circumnavigate the entire continent of Africa. And step three shows the brutal, unforgiving math of that detour. It adds 6,000 kilometers and takes about 2 full extra weeks. It creates an immense bottleneck in the supply chain. Bottom line, there's simply gonna be less oil reaching the market. And that brings us to this pretty stark reality. To avoid an acute, immediate energy crisis right this second, the rest of the world is basically gonna have to burn through emergency reserves. As the source material points out, we're gonna have to run down our already depleted stockpiles at an even faster rate. And to make things even more tense, Iran recently threatened to hit those exact alternative export pipelines we were just talking about, like the UAE's Fujairah port and Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline. The strain on the market right now is just incredible.
Part four, why close it now? All right, so we've looked at the economic math, but now we really need to unpack the geopolitical mystery here, because this is the big question analysts are debating right now. If the goal was maximum damage to global energy markets, why not shut down the Bab al-Mandab at the exact same time the Strait of Hormuz was closed way back in March? Why wait 5 whole months to finally trigger this second choke point? Geopolitical experts are essentially tossing around two main, overlapping theories to explain this. The first theory centers on Iran's strategic leverage. This idea suggests that Iran was keeping the Bab al-Mandab as sort of an ace up its sleeve, a reserve deterrent to give them extra leverage when they needed it. In this scenario, they activated their Houthi proxies to close the strait strictly as a response to the U.S. decision to restart the war. But then there's the second theory, direct Saudi retaliation. This take suggests the Houthis aren't just acting as a puppet for Iran, but are actually closing the strait to strike back directly against Saudi Arabia after a very localized, fragile ceasefire completely fell apart. And these two theories, they aren't mutually exclusive, but they really show just how incredibly complex the motivations are here.
Let's actually look at how fast that local ceasefire broke down because things escalated at lightning speed. Believe it or not, a truce between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia had been holding up surprisingly well since April 2022. But earlier this month, the Houthis allowed an Iranian plane to fly right into Sana'a. That was the first direct flight between Yemen and Iran since 2015. The Saudis deployed jets to scare it off, but the plane landed anyway. Then, the Houthis pushed their luck even further, using that very same plane to fly a delegation to Tehran for the funeral of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. When the delegation tried to fly back, the Saudis basically said enough is enough and attacked the Sana'a airport directly, forcing the plane to divert to the Red Sea port of Hodeidah. In a rapid, tit-for-tat escalation, the Houthis retaliated by attacking Abha airport in southern Saudi Arabia last week. And just like that, a remarkably stable 4-year truce was completely shattered.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway from this whole tangled geopolitical web is this. The Houthis are framing their blockade as a specific, targeted retaliation strictly against Saudi Arabia for the events we just walked through. But here's the thing, maritime choke points do not exist in a vacuum. Regardless of what their initial intent was, this localized skirmish threatens to fold into the wider war, expanding a conflict that has already swallowed up most of the region. And as we've seen, it's immediately disrupting the entire globe's energy supply.
And finally, part 5, shifting global battlegrounds. With these traditional, vital choke points in the Middle East becoming so incredibly volatile, how are the big global superpowers adapting? Where are they looking next? Well, the unexpected domino effect actually points to places like Greenland and the wider Arctic. Think about it. For decades, Greenland was just this giant, impenetrable ice fortress. But as the climate changes and those massive ice sheets recede, completely new access points are opening up. And what's beneath that ice? An intense, massive scramble for rare earth minerals. Almost overnight, this freezing, remote island is turning into some of the most valuable real estate on Earth. It's quickly becoming a fierce new strategic battlefield for Washington, Beijing, and Moscow. It is honestly a wild and pretty sobering shift to witness. We are literally watching the geopolitical chessboard being redrawn right in front of our eyes. So I want to leave you with this thought to mull over. As old choke points like the Bab al-Mandab are squeezed shut, and new frontiers like the Arctic ice melt away, how will the world's desperate, unending need for resources continue to redraw the lines of global conflict? It's a massive question, and for sure, it's one that is going to define the next decade of geopolitics. Thanks so much for joining me for today's explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on the map.